Well, good morning, guys. Pardon me. Welcome to It's All About Faith, Every Home at Church. Whoops, I better take my hat off. Every Home at Church. I wear that sometimes, and it takes 2 or 3 hours to get the lessons ready, and quite frankly, I just forget I have it on. We're in First Peter, chapter 2, verses 13 through 25. I've been suffering from pretty severe sinus infection, and I'm afraid it's interfered with my work. Again, I have a reflection in my glasses, so let's see if we can do it without that. Okay. We said good morning to Indiana this morning. As you know, sometimes we say good morning to Vietnam and California and Missouri and Oklahoma and Africa and Tanzania and good morning Obadiah in Tanzania. Anyway, as a youngster, I spent a considerable amount of time in Indiana. And my mother was born there along with 4 sisters. And so my family history runs pretty deep in that part of the United States. For those who come to study with me and live in Vietnam or Africa or any other part of the world for that matter, the state of Indiana is located a bit east of center of the United States, in the center, and on the west side of it, or the left side of it, is Illinois, and on the right side is the state of Ohio. So that's where Indiana lies. In the spring, a very wonderful tasting wild plant grows in Indiana, and it's called a mushroom. Now, I mention that because my mother hunted those every year. This plant, cooked in butter until it's rather crisp, makes wonderful eating. My mom used to make sandwiches out of them, and I've never, ever got over how tasty they were. She would hunt these every spring, and when she'd find a bunch of them, and they grow here and they grow there, and I don't think anybody ever really knows what makes them grow, but when she'd find a bunch, she'd keep it a secret where they were, so she could go back and get more the next year. I'm told that many people do the same thing. The summers there are quite humid. Everything is green and beautiful. And the smell of new mown hay at harvest time is very pleasant. As are many wildflowers that grow along the fence rows and the country roads. Indiana is a beautiful state. Her forests are beautiful. And in the many Hoosiers, as those who live there in that state are called, say their favorite time of year is either early spring or in late fall. Now, in late fall, the trees in Indiana turn color. The leaves turn color. They're bright and beautiful and are matched only by perhaps a kaleidoscope held up to the light. That's how many colors there are of the leaves in those trees. And then after a while, they dry up and fall on the ground. And when people rake those up in their yards, if they don't bag them up, once in a while they'll burn them. Now those piles of leaves, when I was little and lived in Indiana and we raked them up, of which I was one that raked them up, were great for playing. Your dog would play in them and the other kids of the neighborhood would play in them. But those leaves, if you take a potato and put it in those leaves before you set them on fire, they'll bake the potato. And they're really very tasty. They're quite good. So, my friends in Asia and other parts of the world, you've learned where I spent some of my growing up years. Many of my other years were spent in the state of California, but that's another story. The state of California is where I bought my first old car, a Model A convertible. I paid $100 for it. Had no brakes. I had to redo it. That's also where I found my very first love, and again, that's another story. But it's time to get to the lesson today, and I'll be back in a minute or two with the lesson and the video for it. Okay, Here we go this morning with First Peter, and the more I read of the things that Peter says, I can see why many preachers use his teachings for sermons. Like all Scripture, his words are timeless and full of wisdom and knowledge and teaching. Submit yourselves to the ordinance or the authority of the king. Then he goes on to say the governor as well, and to all of those who are righteous and in charge. Now, this doesn't mean we're to submit ourselves to evil or bow to evil. We'll read a little further on that we're to turn the other cheek, but this again does not mean that we are to sacrifice ourselves or our families to evil. Christians are upstanding people. And he goes on to say, with well-doing, we silence the ignorance of foolish men. That's verse 15. We learn as Christians we're to be servants of God, and following God's way, our yoke, our burden, is made easy as Christ's burden or yoke is easy. Now, this doesn't mean when bad decisions are made that we don't have to carry those burdens and realize the consequences of our actions. It doesn't mean we can do anything we want without counsel with God, and that counsel is what keeps us from making wrong turns in the road that lies ahead of all of us as we go throughout our lives. Now, I can tell you from experience, I've made some of those decisions wrongly myself and have suffered the consequences of my action. It's part of life. We're not perfect. God knows we're not perfect. And this is what it means when Peter says to follow God's way. Counsel. Counsel God. If you're going to make an important purchase, an automobile, a home, furniture, clothing, anything, counsel get God's counsel. Ask him what he needs. Pray about it. You'll get the right answer. That's what keeps us from making these bad decisions. Now, we're to honor all men and women and turn the other cheek. And this then may well mean that when we're accused of doing wrongly, to accept the abuse with patience. If we've been right and we're accused wrongly, accept the abuse with patience. And in doing so, this brings honor to ourselves and to God. For what honor is there in patiently accepting the abuse or the punishment when we're wrong in our actions? If we did something wrong, it's no honor in patiently accepting the consequences of that. We deserve it, right? If we're right and we're abused, persecuted for it, that brings honor to God and it brings honor to you. So in conclusion today, friends, we learned that the stripes, the whippings, and the beatings, and the death up on the tree, that Christ gave his life, and he gives us the example of that, and we're to follow, and in doing so, are converted to the shepherd of our own soul. So that's it for today. Read your lesson. God bless you. And, I don't go through each verse because when you read it for yourself, after the overview, hopefully you understand what you're reading. And that's what's important. To learn of God's message, to learn of his plan, to learn of his love, to learn of his future blessings, to learn of his kingdom for our lives. So, I'll see you another time. God bless.